The crack in the sidewalk was maybe 4 inches long, and it cost me $350. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. Not the frozen bird bath. Not the HOA board meeting that lasted 2 hours over a piece of concrete. The part that gets people is that Sharon Fenwick actually pulled this off, at least for about 6 weeks, before I buried her in her own paperwork. I'm Mark Nelson. I've lived on Chestnut Ridge Lane for 11 years, in a modest 2-story colonial with a driveway that floods every spring and a bird bath in my front yard that my late wife picked out at a garden center back in 2015. It's concrete, heavy as a manhole cover, and it sits about 3 feet off the sidewalk that runs along the front of my property. That sidewalk, like every sidewalk in our neighborhood, is technically shared common area according to the HOA covenants, which means the HOA can do whatever it wants with it and blame you for the bill. This all started in January, during the coldest stretch we'd had in years. Overnight lows in the single digits, wind chill that made your face hurt walking to the mailbox, the whole miserable package. My bird bath had water sitting in the basin from before the cold snap hit, and water does what water does when it freezes: it expands. Sometime during that first brutal week, the ice inside the bird bath basin cracked the concrete, and a chunk of it split off and toppled onto the sidewalk below. The chunk didn't even crack the sidewalk on impact. It just sat there, an ugly gray lump of frozen concrete, until a week later when the freeze-thaw cycle did its thing, and a hairline crack appeared in the sidewalk slab right where the bird bath piece had been sitting. I didn't think anything of it. Sidewalks crack. It's what concrete does in a climate that swings between 50 degrees and 0 within the same week. I've seen worse cracks in that sidewalk that were there before I even bought the house. Then I got the letter. It came in one of those cream-colored envelopes the HOA uses, the kind that always makes my stomach drop a little before I even open it, because it's never good news. It's never "congrats on your nice lawn." It's always a violation, a fine, an urgent notice regarding community standards. This one read, "Dear homeowner, it has come to the board's attention that your bird bath, located on your property adjacent to the shared sidewalk at 114 Chestnut Ridge Lane, has caused structural damage to community infrastructure due to freezing and cracking. Per Section 14.3 of the HOA covenants regarding damage to common elements, you are hereby fined $350 for repair costs. Payment is due within 15 days. Sincerely, the Chestnut Ridge HOA Board." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time out loud to my dog, Biscuit, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Section 14.3. I'd lived here 11 years and never heard of a bird bath clause. I didn't even know bird baths were mentioned anywhere in our 60-page covenant document, which, trust me, I had read cover to cover back when I bought the house, because I'm the kind of guy who actually reads contracts before signing them. Novel concept, I know. I call the HOA office, which is really just a converted garage 2 streets over that Sharon Fenwick has claimed as her personal command center. A woman named Denise picked up, sounding like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Chestnut Ridge HOA, this is Denise." "Hey Denise, it's Mark Nelson, 114 Chestnut Ridge. I got a fine notice about my bird bath cracking the sidewalk. Can you tell me more about this? I've never heard of this rule before." There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you the person on the other end already knows this is going to be a headache. "Oh yeah, the board voted on that a couple weeks ago. New rule: bird baths, planters, anything decorative near the sidewalk that could crack from freezing, homeowners responsible for any damage." A couple weeks ago. Was there a vote? Did homeowners get notice of a vote? You'd have to ask Sharon about that. Of course I would. I want to paint you a picture of Sharon Fenwick because if you've never dealt with someone like her, consider yourself lucky. Sharon is 50-something, drives a white Lexus SUV that's somehow always spotless even in the middle of a slush-covered winter, and has been on the HOA board for going on 9 years now, the last 4 as president. She wears a puffer vest over blazers like it's a uniform, carries a clipboard to the mailbox, and has strong, unshakable opinions about the exact shade of beige your shutters should be. She once fined a family 3 doors down for having a seasonally inappropriate wreath in November, because apparently pumpkins on a wreath after November 15th violate the aesthetic continuity clause. I'm not making that up. I have the email. Sharon doesn't run the HOA so much as she wears it like a crown, and crowns, as we all learn eventually, tend to come off. I decided the fastest way to get answers was to go straight to the source. So the next afternoon, after I got home from work and shoveled my driveway for the second time that week, because the plows in our neighborhood are a joke and half the time create bigger problems than they solve, piling ice ridges right at the end of every driveway, I walked the 2 streets over to the HOA office. Sharon was there behind her desk, sipping from a mug that said "Rules exist for a reason" in cursive script, which felt almost too on the nose to be real. "Mark, I figured you'd be by," she said, like she'd been expecting me, like this was a routine she enjoyed. "Sharon, can you explain this Birdbath fine to me? Because I've lived here 11 years and I've never heard of a rule like this. The board voted on it, unanimously I might add." She said unanimously the way other people say obviously, like the outcome was never in doubt. "When did homeowners get notified there was going to be a vote on this?" She waved a hand. "It was in the December newsletter." "I didn't get a December newsletter." "Well, it went out. I know because I sent it myself." She tapped a manicured nail on her keyboard, the universal Karen gesture for case closed. "I'm very busy and important." I asked her to forward me a copy of that newsletter. She said she'd look into it. I asked for the meeting minutes where the vote took place. She said minutes take time to finalize. I asked for the actual bylaw amendment adding birdbaths to Section 14.3, since bylaw amendments in our HOA require a 30-day notice period and a homeowner vote, not just a board vote, at least according to my recollection of the covenants. Sharon's smile flickered for half a second, just enough for me to know I'd hit something real. "The board has authority over maintenance and safety issues," she said. "This falls under safety. A cracked sidewalk from a frozen birdbath is a safety issue. Someone could trip, Mark, twist an ankle, sue the HOA. Do you know what our insurance premiums would look like if someone sued us over a sidewalk hazard?" I almost laughed. Almost. Because if there's one thing Sharon Fenwick cares about more than the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood, it's the HOA's insurance premiums, mostly because she's convinced herself that if the HOA goes broke from a lawsuit, it'll somehow come out of her own pocket, even though none of us have ever seen a shred of evidence that Sharon personally funds anything around here. If anything, it's the opposite. More fines mean a fatter HOA account, and a fatter HOA account somehow always seems to translate into board retreats at nice hotels 2 counties over, which I only know about because Denise let that slip once during a very tired, very off-the-record phone call. I left the office without a straight answer, but with a plan already forming. I've spent 15 years working as a contracts manager for a construction firm downtown. Reading fine print, catching loopholes, spotting the difference between what a document says and what someone wants you to believe it says. That's not just a skill for me, it's basically my whole career. Sharon picked the wrong homeowner to try this on. That night, I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. Yes, I keep a physical copy because I'm exactly that guy, and started reading Section 14 top to bottom. Section 14.3, as written, covered damage caused by a homeowner's negligence to common elements, including but not limited to vehicles, construction equipment, and installed fixtures. Nothing about birdbaths. Nothing about frozen decorative items. Nothing, in fact, about weather-related damage at all, because, and this felt like the kicker, Section 14.5, 3 lines down, explicitly stated that damage resulting from natural weather events, including but not limited to freeze-thaw cycles, ice and snow load, shall not be considered homeowner negligence and is excluded from Section 14 fines. In other words, the very same document Sharon was trying to find me under had a clause that protected me from exactly this kind of fine. My birdbath didn't crack the sidewalk out of negligence. It cracked because water freezes and expands, which is a natural weather event if there ever was one. The HOA's own rulebook said so, in writing, in a section that had clearly been there long before Sharon's mysterious, unanimous vote. I took photos of both sections side by side, highlighted the relevant language, and felt the first real flicker of confidence since that cream envelope showed up in my mailbox. But I wanted more than just a good legal argument. I wanted proof of what actually happened, timeline and all, because if I've learned anything from years of contract disputes, it's that paper only gets you halfway. You need documentation of the actual event too, especially when you're dealing with someone who might just deny the timeline entirely once she realizes her clause doesn't hold up. That's where my security camera came in. I'd installed a doorbell camera 2 years back, mostly to catch package thieves, but it also had a wide enough field of view to capture most of my front yard, including the birdbath and a good chunk of the sidewalk. I pulled up the app, scrolled back through the footage using the date the crack likely appeared. I figured it out from the temperature records, since I remembered the deep freeze happening the second week of January, and there it was, time-stamped and everything. Footage of the ice expanding overnight, a slow-motion disaster you could practically watch happen in stop motion across 3 days of clips. You could see the exact moment a piece of the birdbath basin split off and dropped onto the sidewalk with a soft thud, no sidewalk crack forming yet. Then, days later, footage showing frost heaving under the slab itself, completely unrelated chunks of ice pushing up from underneath, widening the hairline crack independent of anything my birdbath did. That second part was huge, because it meant the sidewalk crack wasn't even caused by the birdbath chunk sitting on top of it. It was caused by frost heave underneath the slab, a completely separate weather phenomenon that happens across the entire neighborhood every winter, on sidewalks with no birdbaths anywhere near them. I saved every clip, downloaded them onto my laptop, backed them up to a cloud drive, made copies onto a flash drive too, because if there's one thing you learn from arguing with an HOA, it's that you document like your life depends on it, because in a weird way, your wallet kind of does. The next morning, I decided to do a little more digging before my next move. I walked the neighborhood carefully, because the sidewalks were still icy in patches despite everyone's best shoveling efforts, and I noticed something interesting. I wasn't the only one who'd gotten a letter. 3 houses down, the Whitfields had a small ceramic planter that had cracked from the same freeze, sitting near their driveway apron, not even touching the sidewalk. They'd gotten fined $200. $2 streets over, an elderly man named Gary Pruitt had a bird feeder pole that had heaved up slightly from frost, tilting it a few degrees, nowhere near breaking anything. He'd gotten a letter warning him of a potential future fine if the pole wasn't corrected before the ground thawed, as if Gary could control frost heave with a shovel and sheer willpower. And at the corner of the cul-de-sac, a young couple who just moved in that fall, the Ferraros, had a small decorative fountain that had frozen and cracked. They got hit with a $400 fine, the highest amount I'd heard of yet, maybe because they were new and Sharon figured they wouldn't know to push back. A pattern was forming and it wasn't subtle. Every fine involved a frozen decorative item near a sidewalk or driveway, issued in the same week, right after this unanimous vote that apparently nobody but Sharon and maybe 1 or 2 other board members had actually witnessed happen. I started asking around at the mailbox cluster, casually, the way you do when you don't want to look like you're building a case, even though that's exactly what I was doing. Turned out most people had gotten some version of this letter, and even more telling, nobody remembered voting on it, and nobody remembered getting a December newsletter mentioning it either. A few people admitted they'd just paid the fine because it was easier than dealing with Sharon's wrath, which, frankly, made my blood boil a little, because that's exactly how someone like Sharon gets away with this stuff for years. People pay because fighting feels harder than losing $300, and Sharon knows it, and she banks on it, literally. I decided the HOA's finances needed a second look. Our HOA, like most, is required to hold an annual meeting where the treasurer presents a financial report, and by our bylaws, any homeowner can request a look at recent board meeting minutes and financial statements with proper written notice. I fired off that written request that same afternoon, formal and polite, citing the exact bylaw section that granted me the right, because nothing annoys someone like Sharon more than being handed her own rulebook and told to follow it. Predictably, it took her almost 2 weeks to respond, right up against the deadline the bylaws required. When the documents finally came, they were a mess, some pages missing, minutes for December oddly vague on any Birdbath vote, but a suspicious line item in the January financial report labeled Winter Damage Assessments Collected, $2,150, $2,100.50 in fines from frozen decorative items in 1 month. During a stretch of weather that hit basically every house in the neighborhood equally, none of us doing anything wrong except existing in a place that gets cold in the winter. I did some quick math in my head. If the actual damage to any given sidewalk slab cost maybe $150 to repair, which is roughly what a concrete contractor friend of mine quoted me later for a single slab replacement, then the HOA was collecting more than double, sometimes triple, what the actual repairs would cost. And here's the kicker. I checked the maintenance request log, another document technically available to homeowners with written request, and there wasn't a single work order for sidewalk repair anywhere in the system. Not one. The HOA hadn't scheduled a single crew, hadn't ordered a single bag of concrete patch, hadn't done anything with that $2,150 except let it sit in an account that, as far as I could tell from the financial report, Sharon had sole signing authority over alongside the treasurer, a mild-mannered guy named Bill Hutchins, who I got the sense mostly signed whatever Sharon put in front of him. That's when this stopped being about my $350 fine and started being about something a lot bigger. I called an emergency meeting of my own, informal, just neighbors gathering in my living room over coffee, and because it was freezing outside, way too much hot chocolate. I invited the Whitfields, Gary Prout, the Ferraro, and a handful of others who'd mentioned getting hit with these fines. 11 people showed up, squeezed onto my couch and dining chairs, biscuit weaving between everyone's legs looking for pets. I laid it all out. The Birdbath clause that didn't actually exist as written, the frost heave footage, the suspicious financial report, the missing work orders, the pattern of fines issued right after a vote nobody remembered participating in. So what do we do? Asked Mrs. Whitfield, arms crossed, clearly still annoyed about her $200 planter fine. We request a formal board meeting, I said. Our bylaws say any group of 10 or more homeowners can force an emergency meeting with a petition. We have 11 people right here. We bring the evidence, we bring it publicly, and we make Sharon explain herself in front of everyone instead of one-on-one where she can spin things. There was a murmur of agreement, and honestly, the energy in that room shifted from nervous to something closer to excited. The kind of energy you get when a group of people who have all quietly felt pushed around suddenly realize they're not alone, and that maybe, just maybe, there's a way to push back. We drafted the petition that night. I typed it up on my laptop while everyone signed a physical copy, and by the end of the week we had 18 signatures, well over the 10 required. I submitted it to the HOA office, citing the exact bylaw provision, with a copy sent to Sharon directly, and for good measure, a copy to Bill Hutchins, because I had a feeling Bill might not be as loyal to Sharon as she assumed. especially once he understood the financial report he'd signed was hiding some uncomfortable numbers. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, which is really just a repurposed model home with a meeting room that smells faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. Word travels fast in a neighborhood like ours, especially when you tell 18 people something juicy, and by Thursday the room was packed. I counted at least 40 people crammed into folding chairs meant for maybe 25. Coats still on because the clubhouse heater has never once worked properly. Another delightful side effect of an HOA that collects fines instead of fixing actual problems. Sharon sat at the front table alongside Bill Hutchins and two other board members. A quiet older man named Frank, who mostly just nodded along with whatever Sharon said, and a younger woman named Patricia, who I got the sense had joined the board hoping to do something good and was slowly realizing what she'd signed up for. Sharon opened the meeting with her usual polished tone, thanking everyone for coming, framing the whole thing as a chance to clear up some misunderstandings about recent maintenance assessments, which was a generous way of describing what was about to happen to her. I stood up when it was my turn to speak, feeling that mix of nerves and adrenaline you get right before you know you're about to say something that's going to change the whole room. Sharon, can you tell everyone here when exactly the board voted to add bird baths and decorative planters to Section 14.3? As I've explained, the vote took place in December, and it was communicated via the December newsletter. Right. So I requested a copy of that newsletter and the meeting minutes from the vote through a formal written request, as is my right under our bylaws. I held up the folder Denise had eventually sent me. What I got back was a set of December minutes that don't mention bird baths at all, not once. I'll read it to everyone right now, word for word if you'd like. The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone smells blood in the water. Sharon's jaw tightened just slightly. There may have been a clerical error in transcribing the minutes. Sure. And the newsletter, I never got it. Neither did anyone else in this room based on what I've heard this week. I looked around and a chorus of nope and didn't get it either rippled through the crowd. Even Frank, sitting right next to Sharon, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even if there was some communication issue, Sharon said, recovering slightly, the board has the authority to issue fines for damage to common elements. That's not in dispute. Except it is, I said, and this was the part I'd been waiting for. I pulled out my copy of the covenants, already flagged with sticky tabs, and read Section 14.5 out loud, slow and clear, making sure every word landed. Damage resulting from natural weather events, including but not limited to freeze-thaw cycles, ice and snow load, shall not be considered homeowner negligence and is excluded from Section 14 fines. That's directly from our own governing document, Sharon. The same document you're trying to fine us under. A ripple went through the crowd, some quiet laughter, someone in the back muttering, "Oh, she's cooked." Sharon tried to recover. That clause refers to structural damage from things like roof collapses, not decorative items. It says freeze-thaw cycles specifically. That's literally what happened to my bird bath and to the sidewalk. I have security footage. I pulled out my laptop, already queued up, and connected it to the small projector the clubhouse had, because I'd called ahead that afternoon to make sure it would be available. The room watched, some people leaning forward as the footage played, the bird bath cracking, the chunk falling, the days passing, the frost heave visibly pushing up under the sidewalk slab independent of anything to do with my yard. You can see right here, I said, pointing at the timestamp. The sidewalk crack widens 2 full days after the birdbath piece landed on it, and it happens right alongside visible frost heave under the slab itself. This isn't negligence. This is exactly the kind of weather event Section 14.5 protects us from. Sharon opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. And there's something else, I said, pulling up the financial report next. According to the HOA's own January statement, which I obtained through a formal records request, the board collected $2,150 in what's labeled winter damage assessments this month alone. I checked the maintenance log. There's not a single work order for sidewalk repair anywhere in the system. Not one. So where did that money go? The room, which had already been leaning against Sharon, tipped completely now. People were murmuring, a few outright glaring at the front table. Bill Hutchins, the treasurer, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "That money is allocated for future repairs," Sharon said, her voice tighter now, less polished. "The board hasn't scheduled the work yet because we're still assessing contractor bids." "For 6 weeks?" I asked. "In the middle of winter, when the ground's still frozen and no contractor would even start concrete work right now anyway. So there's no urgency to actually fix anything, but there was urgency to collect the fines within 15 days. Someone near the back, I found out later it was Gary Pruitt's daughter, who'd come with him, called out, "Sounds like a slush fund to me." And the room erupted in a mix of laughter and applause, the good kind of applause, the kind that happens when everyone in a room realizes they're watching someone get exactly what's coming to them. Sharon's face had gone a shade of red that clashed badly with her puffer vest. She tried one more angle. "I don't appreciate the insinuation that I've done anything improper with HOA funds. Every dollar is accounted for." "Then show us," I said. "Show us the bank statements. Show us where that $2,150 is sitting right now. And show us the actual vote record for this Birdbath rule. Because based on everything I've found, this rule doesn't legally exist. It was never properly adopted. Which means every single fine issued under it, including mine, including the Whitfield's planter fine, the Ferraro's fountain fine, and whatever warning Gary got about his bird feeder, is invalid." Patricia, the younger board member who'd been mostly quiet all evening, finally spoke up. "Sharon, did the board actually vote on this? Because I don't remember voting on it. I remember you mentioning it in an email and saying it was already decided." The room went dead silent, and honestly, that silence did more damage to Sharon than anything I'd said all night. Because if a sitting board member was saying, out loud, in front of 40 neighbors, that she didn't remember voting on the rule everyone was being fined under, there wasn't really a way to spin that. Sharon didn't have a good answer. She stammered something about informal consensus, and not every decision requiring a formal recorded vote, which directly contradicted the bylaws that require documented votes for any new fine structure, a fact I happened to have printed out and ready to read, because of course I did. At that point, the HOA's own attorney, a guy named Roger Delaney who occasionally showed up to these meetings to keep things technically legal, cleared his throat from the side of the room. "For what it's worth, if there's no documented vote and no proper notice period, any fines issued under that provision would not be enforceable. I'd strongly recommend the board rescind those fines before this becomes a bigger liability issue." Bigger liability issue. That phrase seemed to physically hurt Sharon, given how much she loved invoking liability herself whenever it suited her fining people. The meeting didn't end quietly. It ended with a formal motion, put forward by Patricia and seconded by, of all people, quiet old Frank, to immediately rescind all fines issued under the Birdbath provision, refund every homeowner who'd already paid, and open a full independent audit of the HOA's financial records going back 2 years. The motion passed with every board member voting yes except Sharon, who abstained, arms crossed, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. That should have been the end of it, a nice tidy little victory. But it wasn't, not quite, because a week later, things got a lot more interesting. The independent audit, conducted by an accountant the Homeowners Association hired using a separate emergency vote, one I helped organize, naturally, turned up something nobody expected. It wasn't just the Birdbath fines sitting unused. Going back through 18 months of records, the auditor found a pattern of fines issued under vague or non-existent rules, all of them small enough that most people just paid without questioning, but adding up over time to just under $9,000 sitting in what was labeled a Community Improvement Reserve account that, as far as the auditor could tell, had never actually funded a single community improvement. No new sidewalk sections. No repainted clubhouse. No new playground equipment for the little park by the entrance that had been promising a new slide for 2 years running. Instead, the audit found a series of transfers, smaller amounts, spread out to avoid drawing attention on any single statement, routed to a personal account belonging to, you guessed it, Sharon Fenwick, disguised as board administrative reimbursements for things like meeting supplies and community outreach materials. Expenses that, when the auditor actually asked for receipts, Sharon couldn't produce for more than a handful of small purchases. The rest, totaling almost $6,000 over 18 months, had no documentation at all. That's the point where this stopped being an HOA dispute and became a police matter. The board, now thoroughly rattled and eager to distance itself from Sharon after the audit findings came out, voted to turn the report over to local law enforcement. A detective from the county's financial crimes unit got involved, because at that point we were talking about embezzlement from an incorporated homeowners association, which, depending on the amount and the specifics, can absolutely rise to a criminal charge, not just a civil dispute you settle at a clubhouse meeting. I'll admit, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease watching it unfold. Satisfaction because, obviously, Sharon had spent years making people's lives harder over wreaths and paint colors and now, apparently, fake birdbath rules, all while quietly skimming money off the top. Unease because there's something sobering about watching someone's life actually start to unravel in real time, even someone who arguably brought it entirely on herself. The detective interviewed several of us, including me, mostly to confirm the timeline of the Birdbath fines and how the whole thing had come to light. I handed over my security footage, my copies of the covenants with the highlighted sections, my email correspondence with Sharon and Denise, everything I'd collected. Turns out all that paranoid documentation habit of mine wasn't just useful for winning an argument at a clubhouse meeting. It became actual evidence in a criminal investigation. Sharon was formally charged about 5 weeks later with embezzlement and falsifying financial records, charges that carried real weight given the amount involved and the pattern of behavior the audit uncovered. She was arrested, not dramatically, no handcuffs at a board meeting or anything like that, just quietly at her house on a Tuesday morning, which honestly felt like a strangely mundane end to someone who'd spent years acting like she ran a small kingdom instead of a homeowners association covering 40-some houses on 3 streets. Word got around the neighborhood within hours, obviously, because nothing travels faster than gossip in a place like Chestnut Ridge Lane. And by that evening half the neighborhood had gathered at the mailbox cluster just to talk about it, like some strange impromptu block party centered entirely around collective schadenfreude. The case eventually resulted in a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a lesser embezzlement charge in exchange for restitution and a suspended sentence, mostly because the amount, while significant, wasn't quite large enough for prosecutors to push for serious prison time, and because she had no prior record. She was ordered to repay the full amount taken, just under $6,000, plus court costs, and was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state as part of the plea agreement, which felt like a small but deeply satisfying bit of poetic justice. The Queen of Section 14.3 legally banned from ever wielding a clipboard of authority again. As for the rest of us, the aftermath was honestly better than I expected. The new HOA board, elected in a special election a few months later, brought in Patricia as president, with Bill Hutchins staying on as treasurer. though this time with actual oversight, since the board voted to require 2 signatures on any expenditure over $200 and quarterly public financial reports posted in the community newsletter. The same newsletter that, this time, actually got sent to everyone. Because I personally volunteered to help set up an email distribution list with delivery confirmation, because old habits die hard. The $2,150 collected from the Birdbath fines got refunded to everyone who paid, including me, along with the Whitfields getting their $200 back, and the Ferraros getting their full $400 refunded plus a small, "We're sorry for the inconvenience," credit toward next year's HOA dues, which felt like a genuinely nice touch from a board actually trying to rebuild trust instead of just covering their own liability. Gary Pruitt's bird feeder situation got resolved too, in a much simpler way than anyone expected. The new board just quietly acknowledged that frost heave happens every winter and isn't anybody's fault. And instead of fining people for it, they actually budgeted for proper sidewalk maintenance going forward, including finally getting that persistent crack near my house professionally patched, ironically using some of the same money that had originally been collected under the fake fine. My Birdbath, for the record, survived the ordeal in slightly worse shape than before. That cracked chunk never quite fit back the way it used to. But I decided to keep it anyway, cracked piece and all, sitting right there in my front yard as a weird little monument to the whole saga. Every winter now, when the first hard freeze hits, and I drain the water out of the basin before it can crack anything else, I think about how close I came to just paying that $350 fine without asking a single question, the way plenty of my neighbors did before I started digging. It's a strange thing, living in a community governed by people who are supposed to represent your interests, but sometimes end up treating the whole neighborhood like their own personal fiefdom. Most HOA disputes never go anywhere near a courtroom or a police report. Most of them just end with someone quietly paying a fine they probably didn't deserve, because fighting back feels like more trouble than it's worth, especially against someone who clearly enjoys the fight more than you do. But every once in a while, someone digs into the fine print, checks the security footage, requests the financial records nobody expects you to actually request, and it turns out the whole thing was built on nothing but bluster and a clipboard. These days, the clubhouse heater finally works, thanks to a properly budgeted repair fund. The sidewalks get salted on time when ice hits, thanks to an actual maintenance schedule instead of a slush fund sitting untouched in some account. And every December, the newsletter goes out to every single homeowner. Delivery confirmed, no exceptions, no mysterious gaps in who gets notified about upcoming votes. And every time winter rolls around and that first deep freeze sets in, turning driveways into ice rinks and birdbaths into ticking concrete time bombs, I think about Sharon Fenwick, wherever she is these days, hopefully far away from any clipboard, and I smile just a little, watching the ice creep across my cracked, cheap little birdbath, knowing that this time, whatever happens to it, nobody's sending me a bill for it. Because if there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's that the fine print cuts both ways. Sharon spent years using the covenants as a weapon against anyone too tired or too busy to push back. All it took was one homeowner willing to actually read the document she was hiding behind, and the whole thing came crashing down faster than a chunk of frozen concrete off a cheap birdbath in a January freeze. These days, when new homeowners move onto Chestnut Ridge Lane, somebody always ends up telling them the story, usually within the first month, usually right around the time they get their welcome packet from the HOA. It's become a bit of neighborhood legend at this point, the kind of story that gets exaggerated slightly more with every retelling, though honestly, the real version is wild enough on its own that it barely needs any embellishing. Last winter, during another cold snap, I noticed a new family 2 houses down putting out a little concrete planter right near their sidewalk edge, clearly not thinking twice about it. The way you shouldn't have to think twice about a decorative planter in your own front yard. I walked over, introduced myself, and mentioned casually that if anything ever cracked from the freeze, they had nothing to worry about, because there's no rule against it, and even if there ever tried to be, well, I've got the paperwork ready, just in case. They laughed, not fully understanding yet, the way you don't understand a neighborhood's inside jokes until you've lived through your first HOA newsletter. But they'll learn. Everyone on Chestnut Ridge Lane eventually does. And honestly, that's kind of the whole point. An HOA is supposed to exist for the community, to keep shared spaces looking decent and functioning properly, not to become a personal ATM for whoever happens to be holding the clipboard that particular year. It took one frozen birdbath, one stubborn contracts manager who happened to read the fine print for a living, and one very badly hidden slush fund to remind an entire neighborhood of that fact. These days, my birdbath still sits out front, cracked chunk and all, and every time I look at it, I don't see a $350 fine or a headache of a winter. I see the exact moment this whole neighborhood decided it had had enough, and finally did something about it. And really, isn't that a better use for a bird bath than just holding water for the sparrows?